Well, hello all, and welcome to this really exciting Civilization in Review with the Phrygia Empire. We're here with Nate Mers, a wonderful content writer, and Abby North, our development advocacy coordinator and moderator extraordinaire, to talk about this phenomenal and really exciting empire. Please stay tuned, as there's a really fun cultural reference that will be coming your way. You don't want to miss that part. Well, I'll throw it to Abby to read the 101 words, but right before I do, as a reminder, this is going to be live streamed on our Facebook, so you're with us live here. It will also be posted to our YouTube, our Instagram, our Spotify, and our website, so you can get all of this great content. And of course, to read the rest of this article and anything else about the Phrygian Empire, you can go to us at alphusaic.net. Take it away, Abby.
Located in modern-day northwest Turkey, the story of the ancient kingdom of Phrygia began with a mythological king and became the name of a geographical region for centuries to come. Little is known of the Phrygian society, but their metalworking, woodcraft, and embroidery were greatly valued and immensely influenced the ancient world. From the Phrygia civilization's potential origins in the Balkans to their migrating to fight in the Trojan War in 12th century BCE and their sudden collapse in the 7th century BCE, the kingdom of Phrygia adapted to circumstances and left a legacy with strong influences that have been sprinkled throughout history.
Well done.
What a lot of cool information to begin. Let's just start with the sort of the same first question for everyone. Why did you choose this empire specifically of all of the ones out there?
I've had a lot of interest in Anatolia and in Turkey for a while now, and it's just always interesting to see the history of like a place that you studied for a little bit, and just like how far it can go back and how that's impacted modern day, and even thousands of years before, how societies interacted then. So yeah, it's something I didn't know much about, this Phrygia in particular. So just had a curious mind, so that's why.
Was there any connection, for those who don't know, Nate is a ancient history nerd, perhaps more than Ben. I think I've said that on a previous episode. So was there something in your previous knowledge of ancient civilizations or of the region that like when you started researching, that like particularly fueled your interest in it as you started researching more, or that you started like connecting with other bits of information you had or were interested in?
Yeah, absolutely. I always loved learning about Roman and like Greek history and Macedonian history. Like when learning about Phrygia, it was always interesting to see the close sort of cultural ties it had to Greece, because Anatolia was colonized by Greeks in the ancient world, like on the sea mostly, and just like seeing like pottery or like similar mythologies, as well as like cultural and like social structures and stuff like that, in particular with like the Equestrian Class, which was sort of like a aristocracy, but they could own like they held like they were highly influential because in one part they could afford horses, which made up an important part of the military, not as significant as Macedon later on, but was definitely an important part. So just interests in other ancient empires and other ancient cultures and stuff like that. Just seeing the connections was always really interesting. Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah, I mean, you've made the claim several times, Abby, that he's a bigger history nerd. So, well, we might go tit for tat later, but
no, it's okay.
Regardless, the Phrygia Empire I didn't know anything about, so thank you for educating me and the world on this really, really cool empire. I find the word sudden collapse really fascinating in your intro. And I mean, I know we haven't really started about the beginning of this empire.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm jumping ahead too much, but tell me about that. I'm assuming they lost a mega battle from the reading, but if you know anything more, I'm fascinated by the word sudden in that sentence.
Yeah. It was sudden for that time in the sense that it wasn't like a day, but it was pretty quick. And it was primarily so like they had been at war with the Hittite Empire under King Midas towards, I think it was like 690s or so. and they were at war kind of, and then they made an alliance at the end. But by then, the Phrygians had kind of been not overextended in terms of land, but just overextended in terms of like just how things were going. And to the north, coming out of like the Caucasus, were the I don't know how to pronounce. I think it's the Cimmerians. They were sort of like a nomadic people who came from the north and sort of moved through and sort of ransacked everything. As with, a lot of empires that happened, like the Roman Empire had, the Germans and Visigoths and Celts and stuff like that, which led to their collapse. And yeah, so like it wasn't necessarily a battle, but just sort of like this slow culmination of things, and then this outside force that nobody could predict sort of accelerated it all. Yeah.
So maybe I guess we can backtrack now. And you mentioned Midas, and I think your average viewer, including myself, who knows less about some of these civilizations, has heard of Midas. And of course, there's a historical and a mythological lens with which you can talk about him, both of which were important to the civilization. So I don't know if you want to start with him or how the first Midas sort of came into the civilization before the King Midas III that you're referencing, but maybe sort of paint that landscape to tell people who don't know those connections between the Phrygian civilization and Greek mythology.
Yeah, so I guess to start off, like Abby said from my intro, it's believed they sort of came out of the Balkans after, like, that whole region was sort of drought infested, and it kind of pushed a lot of people south or west. And so they kind of migrated through Greece and ended up settling in northwest Turkey, modern day northwest Turkey. But like sort of towards their beginning, they helped fight with the Trojans in the Trojan War, which was Homer talked about it, like they called them something different. I don't remember what it was, but they had names. But
were they in the horse or outside the horse?
They were defending
I'm
Troy.
Just kidding.
Okay. So yeah, and then just like being in such close contact with the Greeks, made obviously cultural ties much more significant. And like there's a statue from Phrygia that may have been recovered. I think that is of Zeus, but they had a different name for Zeus. That's just sort of an example of shared mythologies and cultural ties that they had.
But in terms of Midas and his connection,
Midas, it's the Midas touch that turned anything into gold. He went to I believe some oracle and pretty much was like, I want to just be rich, and he was like, okay, I'll turn everything you touch into gold, pretty much. And then he did, and then apparently Midas starved all the time because everything he touched turned gold, so he couldn't eat it. That's really the only connection, I would say.
Yeah, I feel like Midas. That's the mythological connection, and then there's the interesting historical connection that Midas. I think these are two different Midases potentially in the line of Midases, but one of them brought a knot into Gordian. The city, the Gordian knot, which you could talk about for the historical reference.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it was under King. So like there was this legend that the next person who came in on an ox cart would be the next Phrygian king, and Gordius came in on an ox cart, and so he was named the next king. And then under his, I believe his grandson Midas, the Midas touch, they tied this specially woven knot called the Gordian knot that was made up of like really hard twine and all these things, and it was essentially a culmination of knots. And then they there's sort of legend behind it that whoever was able to untie the knot next would be would rule all of Asia, and nobody was able to do it, including Alexander the Great, but he ended up just taking a sword and hacking at it, and then he conquered all of what they knew as Asia. Yeah.
So cheating works.
Cheating works, I guess. Yeah.
Great lesson from the Phrygian Empire. Cheating works, and don't wish for money because you'll turn everything into gold. Great.
Yeah.
No, I would say I knew both of those stories. I did not realize they were Phrygian. I thought they were Greek.
Oh.
So that was interesting. And maybe some other viewers might be in the same boat with me, that the Gordian knot and the King Midas's golden touch, be they true or not, regardless, their stories attributed to this specific empire, which is a fun little thing to learn. There's a lot of other cool nuggets, gold or otherwise, in your article here as well, that I really want to dive into. I mean, it seems like the equestrian class was a really big part of this empire, and so if you want to talk a little bit more about that component, I think that's really fascinating right now.
Yeah, absolutely. The equestrian class aristocracy, they were really head of a lot of the economic sectors of the Phrygian societies, such as like wool and like metals that they would trade with like Greeks and Persian, or not Persians at the time, but like Hittites, and they were on the like royal road, which has been mentioned before, which is sort of like an ancient trading road. And then, so like they just had money and they could afford horses, but there wasn't a lot of that. And essentially, the equestrian class, when it came to warfare, they didn't fight too much, because they would often, this is similar in Greek warfare and ancient before Roman, like Italian warfare. And they would just kind of let the hoplites, the spears, fight each other. And then once they broke, the equestrians, the equites, would just go after the retreating fighting men. And then that's where a lot of the casualties would happen, actually, was when the retreats were happening. And so that's kind of why they were used and why they were so sparse, just because it costs a lot of money to upkeep a horse, and there weren't a ton of aristocrats either. So, yeah.
So is the equestrian, in terms of the aristocracy, is the equestrian piece sort of unique to Phrygia, or is this quite common in the wider regional landscape at the time?
Yeah, it was a pretty common feature among the Greeks and among Romans for a little bit. And also in like, it wasn't so much similar to east of Phrygia, just because the landscape was different. There were different like social structures and stuff like that. And so you'd see, at least later on into the ancient world, you'd see like a lot more horses being used by everybody, and like in Persia, for example, like the Persian Empire, the Sassanids, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Very fascinating. I think the equestrian class is relatively unique, at least for the ones that we've talked about so far. So I thank you for that insight. Obviously, the trading and royal road things is very much connects literally, physically, and in theme, all of these ancient empires. So there's undoubtedly connections between the Phrygians and most of the other at the time on our system. Super fascinating. I'm curious, as you talked about sort of the religious structure, that they had largely the same Greek pantheon, more or less, just different names. Is there anything more into that sort of background, or that was basically the best way to describe their
yeah, I mean, it's the best way to describe it. Like a lot of polytheistic civilizations kind of had similar, at least somewhat similar, like explanations for what happened with gods. But yeah, Greece, Phrygia, Rome, they all had pretty much the same pantheon, but just different names.
So Nate is particularly interested in Armenia. He has Armenian roots, and you mentioned in this Civilization 101 that there's a connection between the Phrygian language and the Armenian language. So could you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, I don't know much about it, but from what I understand, it connects to classical Armenian, which was, from thousands of years ago. There's just some like etymological roots that are similar to the Armenian language. And I believe Phrygian is sort of like its own sort of thing as well, at least when it existed, it was sort of like its own language as well. Same with Armenian compared to today, like it kind of goes Indo-European, then like Armenian, which is interesting. And I believe with Phrygian as well, it's just sort of its own stepping stone.
Interesting.
Yeah, very cool. The interconnections of language across all of these empires as well, I think is incredibly fascinating. Yeah. I think a fun project someone may want to do, if that maybe you, is tracing the language like roots, or linguistic connection points. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm fluent, but I do speak Arabic, and knowing the overlaps and interconnections and how it started from pre-hieroglyphs as well, and all of those connections. It's so incredibly fascinating.
Fascinating,
so it doesn't surprise me at all that Armenian modern language has ancient, I guess, Phrygian and Greek and Turkish. And I love that. Very cool. Great question, Abby. That's a cool connection to modern times. I'm curious as well, the other thing that I really liked about the intro was like the pottery, metalworking, woodcraft, very, I'm assuming, innovative and trade focused society. If you know anything more about sort of that background? Yeah,
it was just due to their like rich resources in metals, and like they were just trading a lot with like Hittites and Greeks, and their metal workers were highly sought after, just because they were so much more often working with metal than other places. And they were able to trade with Greeks and the Hittites. And then there was also the sorry, what was the second part of that question that I missed?
Just if you know like more background on their pottery, metalworking. I mean, they have the resources.
Right. Okay. I mean, it was beautiful art according to people in the ancient world, in pottery, and you can find, people have found pottery as far I think east as like the Indus River, like that region. So it's from Phrygia, like Phrygian art. And so, it's kind of been able to work its way throughout the region. It's still relatively unknown, kingdom or civilization, but it's interesting to see that it pops up so far out there, like in terms of art and stuff like that. So it's really interesting.
Do you know, what other parts of the world currently would have or would be most likely to have pieces of their art or physical infrastructure? Or
I mean, Turkey for sure. You can still see remnants of it wasn't their capital city of Gordian, I believe, or Gordos, but like another big city, like trading city, is just, I think, like 100 kilometers south of Ankara, I believe. I could be wrong, but you can still see a few remnants in terms of like architecture or just buildings that they had. But you'll find like Phrygian art in Turkey and probably Greece as well.
So besides physical art that has carried on from the civilization, we do also have a musical connection that Nate and I found, in the spirit of bringing in some pop culture, and as a nod back to Freddie Mercury and our musical connection with, what empire was that, Ben?
It was the Zoroastrian Empire. I think it was the Sasanians, which ironically he mentioned a couple minutes ago.
So this is a bit of a cop-out because the legacy is mostly a name thing, but as some of you may know, including Nate's brother, who is a composer who may or may not be watching, there is something in music called the Phrygian scale, which was first used in 128 BC by an Athenian composer. that is used in a lot of modern music for sort of spooky, creepy, darker tones. And just to spice things up, we'll play a little bit of what that looks like, because most of you, maybe not the older ones, but the younger people will recognize the modern influence in a specific song. So give us a moment while we share. And Ben, if you can just tell me when you can see this, okay?
Go for it.
So first we'll show you sort of an example of what the actual scale would have sounded like when the Athenian composer was using it, obviously with a different instrument.
A minor. A minor is just A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. If I take my second note, which is B, and if I...
So very exciting. And now, don't be too excited. Here's our modern representation of that scale, an example.
1, 2, and 3, and 4. 1, 2, and 3, and 4.
Anyways, that was for all the music lovers out there. And I don't know, of course, it's not true that the Phrygians themselves, King Midas was not listening to Missy Elliott, unfortunately. However, it is interesting, I think, even just to connect that back to 128 BC with the common name for the region is cool.
I would venture King Midas did touch it because it turned to gold. I mean, I would probably go as far to say that, honestly.
Probably right, honestly.
But yeah,
bring things together.
Do you know why it's called the Phrygian chord scale, etc. by any chance?
From what I know, it's because, I mean, I looked it up and there's really not much, but I'd assume it's because Phrygia was still like a province, and like it still had remnants of it. It wasn't like a kingdom anymore. And for a little bit after their collapse, they were a satrapy. Is that what it's called? Yeah, satrapy under, I think the Hittites and then the Persians. That's like the famous Persians at some point. Yeah.
Just a borrowed name. And I know that Catholic Church used it in the medieval period. They adapted the scale for their own purposes. So it's clearly a very versatile scale if it was used by the Athenians, the Catholic Church, and Missy Elliott. So
there you go.
What a combo. Yeah, I'm kind of gobsmacked of how incredibly connected. I mean, I'm not gonna say yours is the best empire, Nate, but to have Missy Elliott and King Midas in the same combination, pretty incredible.
Yeah,
I don't think we can get any more cool than that. But is there any other pieces in the history that you researched that you enjoyed or were interested by, or anything of that nature?
No, I mean, it was interesting to learn about for sure. Something I never would have researched on my own. So it was good to do that for sure. Yeah.
Was there anything while you were researching that you thought that you thought this is a bit like outside of the scope of what I'm doing, but I'll come back to this later? Was there anything even connecting to like a different civilization that you feel like you'll continue to like be more interested in the future?
I'm not sure.
Maybe Greek or Roman related.
Oh yeah, I'm always interested in that. And then just I guess always interested in the timeline of history. So even if it starts here, moving its way through that region throughout time, it's always an interesting way to start. I would say it's with ancient civilization.
Absolutely. And I mean, we have been pretty intentional to not have the Greek or Roman empires on Alphusaic because there's so many other pieces of history that are not talked about. And so, obviously, if you wanted to do a further article, we could totally chat not on this live call about what that may look like. Excited to. But in the purposes of the Civilization in Review, all of these 75 plus, we probably will add more as we uncover them, empires, is to really showcase these uncovered parts of history. I mean, clearly the Phrygian still has a huge impact today. Missy Elliott is a wonderful example of that. But also, the way we talk about architecture and history and religion and language and Armenian culture, everything is all connected to this specific community and all the other ones on our site. So thank you again for choosing this random name. One of the weirdest letter combinations, the R's before the Y every time.
confuses me.
Phrygia, which again I can't do. I think I spelled it wrong on the website. I'm going to change it really quickly as I'm reading it. But, just thank you again, really, for focusing on this empire. I think it's a really important part of history to talk about. So thank you again for choosing it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
As seemingly random as it may have been. Well, I guess we'll wrap up here then. Thank you again so much, Nate and Abby, for your stellar pop culture references as usual. The bar is, I mean, I was already way too high with Queen, Freddie Mercury, so I don't know how you're going to top it next, but I have full faith. For all, thank you so much for tuning in. You can see the rest of this call, his incredible article, and the rest of our wonderful content at alfusaic.net. That's ALFUSAIC.net. Have a good evening. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks.